And we'll move on to the next slide, and I will introduce our topic today and our speaker. So we are joined by Nicole Danaher-Garcia. Some of you, I recognize some names in the chat, already know Nicole. She is going to be talking about dolphin friendships. There she is. Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
Or association patterns among Atlantic spotted dolphins off Bimini, the Bahamas. Bimini is where I'm joining you from today, so hopefully the technology will hang in there. And a reminder to submit your questions to the chat, and at the end of Nicole's talk, we will get to all those questions. Nicole has been with the Dolphin Communication Project since 2012, which doesn't sound like so long ago until I start adding up the numbers. But since then, Nicole has been invaluable to our organization, and specifically our Bimini, Bahamas field site. She's wrapping up her PhD work, and this is a section of her PhD work that was recently published. So I'm ready to hand it off to you, Nicole.
Thank you. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. As Kel said, I'll be sharing what is kind of the first part of my research, and it was published at the end of last year. And basically, it's the first level of looking at dolphin friendships, but it's specifically the association patterns among these Atlantic spotted dolphins around Bimini. So we'll start out with a very informal, not real pop quiz, if I can get the slide to go forward. What do you think bats, spider monkeys, spotted hyenas, chimpanzees, dolphins, and humans all have in common? Well, you might have a few guesses. They definitely don't look that similar across the board, but they're all parts of very complex social systems where individuals have different relationships that are going to depend on their different factors about them, like how old they are, whether they have kids or not. So all of these complex social systems are characterized by what we call fission-fusion dynamics. And that simply means that groups form and break apart over time, depending on an individual's needs, the environment, etc. So if you think about humans, during a normal time when we're not encouraged to stay at home, we would normally be spending about 40 hours per week at work with our coworkers or at school with our classmates. And then maybe we'd spend some time after work in school hanging out with our closer friends from those groups. And then we would go home and spend time with our families. So we're gonna shift the group composition depending on what it is that we're doing. Also, it's possible that we might leave a group if somebody that we don't particularly care for joins it, or we might join a group if our best friend has gone over to hang out with somebody else. So this is what we call fission-fusion dynamics, groups forming and breaking apart. So this sounds fairly complicated. So how do we study such complex social systems? Well, interactions are the building blocks of these systems, where if you think about repeated interactions between individuals, like you and your friends, you're gonna have different interactions over time, and eventually that's gonna develop a relationship. And that relationship can change based on the context, but these relationships and how they are built in a society are gonna determine the social structure of a population or a species. So what we're really interested in order to understand the social structure, is the relationships and how they are spread out depending on an individual's sex and age and all of that. And we can define relationships based on the content, quality, and temporal patterning of their interactions. For example, if you're at work, you have a certain relationship with your coworkers, the content of your interactions is going to be related to your work. Hopefully the quality is going to be positive in general. And over time, if you continue to have positive working relationships, you're going to become more competent, you're going to trust each other more, you're going to work together better. And in a different relationship, the content might be more fun. You might go out to the beach or go to the movies or something, and all of those relationships would be really positive. And as you do that more, you might develop a friendship, and that might be how your relationships with your closest friends have developed. So looking at the different interactions is how we can determine the actual relationships between individuals. And from those relationships and how they are laid out over the whole group, we can determine a population's social structure. So if relationships are so important, how do we study them? Unfortunately, for many species, especially dolphins and whales, observations of their interactions is very challenging. They only come to the surface when they need to breathe. They spend much more time out of our view underwater. And with the exception of some field sites like Bimini and groups like the Dolphin Communication Project that get underwater observations of interactions, most groups aren't that lucky. So a very commonly accepted method to overcome this is to use association or time spent in the same group as a substitute for interaction, meaning that you assume that if individuals are together in a group, they will at some point interact. So even if you aren't able to observe that actual interaction, you can assume that they will. So if you're thinking about like a classroom, you can assume that if the teacher and a student are in the same classroom for a given amount of time, they will eventually interact. And then we can quantify these associations using what are called coefficients of association, or COAs, which are basically an estimate of the proportion of time that individuals spend together versus apart. So they're an estimate because we can only see that individuals are together or not together when we're looking at them. So if we see dolphin A and B in a group, we know they're together. If we see dolphin A, but dolphin B isn't there, we know that they're not. But what if we don't see dolphin A or B? We don't know if they're together somewhere else where we are not looking at them. We're also only observing dolphins when we're out on dolphin surveys. We can't see them all the time. So it's just an estimate based on the amount of times that we are able to observe the dolphins. And then from these COAs, we're able to create a network of associations. This is an example of a very simple network where the white circles would be the individuals and the lines between them represent their COA. In this type of network, the thickness of the line corresponds to the strength of the association. So higher COAs have thicker lines. So you can simply look at a network like this and get a decent idea of the relationships among individuals. And you can see things like this little dot isn't connected to anybody else. So by creating these networks, we're able to visualize relationships, but we can also investigate things using special statistics that are geared towards networks that can tell us what, for example, the removal of one individual from that network is going to do to the rest of the relationships. We can also use these associations to get different measures of like centrality, how important one individual is to the flow of information for the rest of individuals, and different things like that. So now that you have an idea of how we look at associations, we'll get into our Bimini site. So probably most of you are familiar with Bimini, but for anybody who isn't, or for review, this is the south end of Florida. Miami's here, and about 50 miles offshore is this red marker indicating the Bimini Islands. You'll see that Bimini is on the westernmost end of the Great Bahama Bank here, which is all pretty shallow water, but it runs right alongside the very deep, fast-moving Gulf Stream. Zooming in a little bit, you'll see how close Bimini actually is to the deep water. So we think that the dolphins use this shallow water on the bank for socializing and resting and stuff, and then that they zip over into the deep water to forage. So they have a pretty easy time of it. But this is where we look for our dolphins. So we don't actually look for them in the deep water. We don't know that they forage there. That's just a hypothesis. But we do see them resting, traveling, and socializing in this area. And then how do we collect our data for identification? Well, we collect surface and underwater observations. So we can get IDs from that. We can get group sizes of the groups that we're seeing from the boat. But then we also only use dolphin IDs that we were able to confirm through video and still pictures. So we use what we call a mobile video acoustic system, or the MVA. And this is an example of the mini MVA, just one of the many iterations of the MVA that we've used over the years. And we also collect underwater still photos, and that's usually thanks to interns and students and eco-tour guests that take the time to help us collect photos. Because our video, we focus on one individual in order to use that video for behavioral observations later. So in order to get a better idea of the entire group composition, we really rely on those underwater photos. And then from these underwater photos, we're able to identify specific individuals. On a bigger scale, if this might be reviewed for some of you again, age in spotted dolphins is determined by their spot patterns. Spotted dolphins are born without spots, and when they're first born, they have these little tiger stripes from being folded up in their mom's belly, and they're called a neonate. We don't actually see neonates very often at all, but once those stripes have faded after a few weeks, they have this two-toned coloration, but still have no spots, and they are a calf, and they're reliant on their mother. Once they start becoming independent, they start developing dark spots on their sides and their belly, and then once they're fully independent, they are juveniles. They start getting lighter spots on their back when they're subadults, and then as adults, they have spots on spots on spots, and you can't differentiate specific spots from the other, and they are considered adults. And then we're able to confirm sex through direct observation of their belly. So males have this kind of exclamation point with their urogenital slit and the anal opening, and then females have what looks kind of like a division symbol, and that's their mammary slits on either side. But then we are able to identify individuals down to the specific individual. So in our spotted dolphin photo ID catalog, we have 117 right now, and they are identified by unique spot patterns and permanent injuries or scars. So for example, you can see this individual has enough spots that we're able to identify it from or confirm it from one year to the next. It also has these scars here that some of them may get covered up by spots as it gets older, but some of them are still going to be useful from one year to the next. And then we add them to the catalog once they have enough recognizable spots and or scars, and once they have confirmed images of both sides. So I have this left side. Once I'm able to confirm that this is the right, then I can confirm and add this individual as number 64, Prince William, who I did not pick because he's my favorite dolphin, or maybe he is. But we use these individual IDs in order to confirm group membership. Then we can calculate their COAs, so that is the amount of association between two individuals. And in a whole network, we're able to look at different patterns. So what do COAs actually tell us? Well, very simply, they can tell us which dolphins spend time together and how much time they spend together. So once we've calculated these COAs, the first thing that comes out is something that might look a little overwhelming. This is what we call an association matrix, and it is actually a simplified version of it. And while it is kind of overwhelming and it's difficult to really pick up patterns just from looking at numbers, we can see things like if we were to randomly pick out number 69, Tim, and number 4, Buster, and then we follow their row and column until they intersect, we see that their COA is 0.84, meaning that in this time period, we observe them together 84% of the time. It's a very high COA. Then we can compare that to things like what number 69 does with number 35, Lil Jess. We see them together 17% of the time. So we can start to uncover patterns based on the individual or based on their sex. So if number 35, who's a female, were to interact with another female, for example, Leslie, number 80, we see that she spends more time with Leslie than she does with Tim. She spends 41% of her time with Leslie. But as I said, these association matrices are kind of overwhelming, and it's difficult to really get an idea of what's going on. So then from these, we create an association network. This is a network of the same information where females are in green squares and males are blue squares. So even just looking at the matrix without, the sociogram is what we call it, without having any other context, you can see that females tend to group together and males tend to group together, though we do see associations connecting them. So again, these lines are indicating their COAs, The thicker lines indicate a higher COA, and then they're grouped together, or they're plotted on this sociogram based on their similarity. So individuals who have higher association with their associates are plotted closer together. So here we can again pick out number 69 and number 4, who are very close together, and then 35 is across the sociogram from those two. So visualizing them like this is very useful because humans are really good at visually picking up patterns like this. And then we can run those statistics, the network analyses, on the actual numbers to pick up patterns. Like we'd be able to compare the associations among the males and females and see if they have any preferences. And in this population, we actually see that individuals do have preferential associations with each other, like we see with Tim and Buster, and males tend to associate with other males, females tend to associate with other females, and have stronger relationships with their own sex than they do across sexes. So as obviously you can see, males and females do spend time together. So looking at a slightly more complex sociogram, this is our overall association network from 2003 to 2016. It's what we were looking at in the paper that was published at the end of last year. In this image, females are orange circles and males are blue squares. And this is a fairly long time period, 14 years. Individuals may change their associates depending on their age, but we are able to pick up a lot of different patterns by looking at such a complex system. For example, this little circle of individuals has very strong associations amongst each other. So we do happen to see these individuals a lot, but I have corrected for the fact that we see them more often than we might see number 70, and we still see that they have higher association between each other than they do, than other pairs do. So strong link, thick lines, indicates a high COA, and that's what we would be calling a friendship. They're preferentially choosing who they're hanging out with. And most excitingly for me is these two. Number 64, again, is Prince William. Number 22 is Splitjaw. They are actually what inspired me to be asking this question in the first place. Before I knew what COAs were, before I had any idea of patterns of association, when I was still a green intern, it was really easy to see that when you were out on the boat, if you saw number 22, you could be on the lookout for number 64, and you almost always saw them in the same group. And then as you start looking a little bit closer, you also see number 78, Speedy, number 69, Tim, and number 4, Buster, also in the same group. So if we had pictures from a certain underwater encounter and we didn't know where to start, if we were able to identify one of these 5, it was a safe bet that you could start with another one of the group and you would be able to find them in the group too. But as you'll notice, it's not just males that are included in this circle of strong friendships. There are females that preferentially associate too. So similarly, we can look for number 14, Tina. If we were to find number 10, Romeo, or number 36, Swoosh in a group, it might be a good place to start. So in addition to looking at which individuals spend time together, we can actually learn other things from studying COAs. For example, we can study the impact of demographic changes, meaning dolphins leaving or joining the group. And specifically, we have been doing that as part of my project. We were able to confirm that new dolphins arrived in 2013 from a northern part of the Bahamas in an area called White Sand Ridge. These dolphins had been studied for decades also, and we were able to use photographs collected from White Sand Ridge and compare them to pictures from Bimini since 2013 and confirm that those dolphins had actually joined the Bimini dolphins. So now we know that new dolphins joined in 2013. What can we do with that information? We can investigate if the patterns changed for the resident dolphins. Did Bimini dolphins start to associate with White Sand Ridge dolphins? Maybe the ones that came from White Sand Ridge were bigger. Maybe they were more powerful. They were better at fighting off predators or something. Maybe you would want to associate more with those individuals. Or maybe having some strange individuals join you would make your associations with your Bimini dolphins stronger because you don't want to interact with those new ones. And then we are also able to look at if the new dolphins have been incorporated into the resident group. So it's fairly unusual to see such a large group of dolphins move from one area to another and join a resident group, but it has been observed previously, specifically on Midway Atoll in the Hawaiian Islands. And those dolphins, the new ones, never incorporated. They were not observed to interact, and when they did occasionally interact, it was very aggressive exchanges. But the resident dolphins didn't seem to accept the new ones very much. So we can look at what the Bimini dolphins might do with the new white sand ridge dolphins. So here we have the network after those dolphins joined. So this is from 2013 to 2018. And you can start to see some very clear patterns. Again, individuals are plotted based on their similarity to each other. If they have more closer associates with high COAs, they're plotted closer together. And the ones that have the highest association are plotted closer to the center. And in this image, Bimini dolphins are circles, white sand ridge dolphins are squares, and their IDs have WSR. Females are yellow and males are blue. So right off the bat, we can see this little circle. 4 out of the 5 male dolphins that we know have the strongest association in the Bimini population still do, even in the presence of these white sand ridge dolphins. And then the white sand ridge dolphins tend to associate with each other, with a couple of older male Bimini dolphins. And then we also see little clusters of females that are still associating and preferentially associating Bimini dolphins with Bimini dolphins. You'll also notice that included in this image are only male white sand ridge dolphins. We do see female white sand ridge dolphins, they're just a little bit less frequently observed. So this image has excluded dolphins that weren't seen a certain number of times just to make the statistics more meaningful. So in addition to looking at patterns like this, we want to try to understand why these dolphins might form these friendships. What benefits do you get from being friends with another dolphin? And we're not really positive, but we can look at other studies of associations and make some hypotheses. So the first most obvious way to look at it, especially since we see males that form preferential associations, is this long-term study in Shark Bay, Western Australia, where male dolphins form what are called alliances. So alliances are specific because individuals cooperate for a purpose. In this population, male pairs and trios will work together to fend off other male pairs and trios in order to gain access for females. It would be much more costly if you were one male trying to fight off a whole bunch of other males in order to be able to mate with a female and have your genes be in the population. So it's beneficial to them to work together in order to fight off males. Even though you're reducing the chance that you're going to have your genes propagated, you're actually increasing it because if you were alone, you would basically have no chance. So these alliances don't just form when females are present. They are observed together a lot of the time, pretty much all the time, and these alliances can last over decades, where the same individuals will be seen spending a lot of time together. So they're spending time together while they're socializing in order to strengthen their bonds so that they can count on each other when they need it, when they have to fight off other males. But does this apply around Bimini? Even though we do see preferential associations among males, we actually don't see them coercing females and needing to fight off other males for access to females. We see them in mixed sex groups just kind of mating as they can, and nobody seems to be arguing about it. So we don't think that these alliances exist around Bimini. So what else could be happening? It's possible that long-term friendships are going to provide social support when they're interacting with a species that lives with them, but might be a little bit bigger. So on the White Sand Ridge, on the Little Bahama Bank, those dolphins are also seen to form alliances, and they think that it might have to do with aggressive interactions with bottlenose dolphins. Similar to around Bimini, they have bottlenose dolphins that will come into mixed groups and socialize with the spotted dolphins. However, even though this picture looks rather aggressive, The associations that we see between spotted dolphins and bottlenose dolphins around Bimini aren't actually aggressive. This behavior could be characterized as aggressive, but we don't see the spotted dolphins trying to fight off the bottlenose. We don't see them ganging up against bottlenose. We don't see them trying to swim away. They're very willingly socializing, mixing with bottlenose. So we actually don't think that this applies either. So what might actually be happening around Bimini? Our third hypothesis is that long-term friendships may provide defense against predators. So we have seen that 15% of Bimini dolphins show evidence of a failed shark attack, meaning that 15% of our dolphins have some kind of scarring. It's failed because the dolphin is still alive. We don't know how many actually are fatal shark attacks. But we see a lot of tiger sharks. That's what's pictured here. This is a picture borrowed from the Bimini Shark Lab. And then, as I said before, we think that the dolphins go off into the deep water. And in the deep water, there are other big, scary predatory sharks, mako sharks. We also see bull sharks around Bimini. So perhaps while they're socializing, individuals are forming these preferential friendships. They're making sure that they have a good relationship with each other so that when they need help, they can confidently know that somebody's going to have their back. Another possible reason is that it might provide help during feeding. So just as a reminder, we think that they leave this shallow water and go into the deep water to forage. And probably what they're finding out there are schooling fish. And if you try to picture just one dolphin going after a school of fish, those fish are going to disperse and run away, and the dolphin's going to expend a lot of energy trying to feed on its own. So you probably benefit from cooperating, having other dolphins that are going to guard the back of the school so that they can take turns catching fish. So we don't actually know for sure that this is what our Bimini dolphins do, but it's a safe hypothesis that that's how they feed. But also because we don't see them foraging on the shallow bank, we're pretty confident that that's where they go to forage. So in addition to more opportunities for fish, they also have more opportunities to run into predators. So it might be beneficial, again, when you're going out to feed, to go out in big numbers and to have a good relationship with the individuals that you're foraging with, so that you can know that they're not just going to run off and leave you there, that they're going to support you if you need help. We also see in other species, such as sperm whales, individuals seem to share information. So if one individual knows where there's a good feeding spot, they might share it with their close associates, and you benefit from that individual's information if you maintain a good relationship with them. And as I mentioned, females have strong associations too, which may be related to the reproductive stage. So we know that first-time mothers might associate with mothers that have already had a calf, and that way they can learn from them. They might not know exactly what to do, may give them a little bit more confidence. Also, mother-calf groups hang out together, possibly for babysitting. This is also called alloparenting. The calves can play together. One mom can keep an eye on them while the others take a break, that type of thing. So here we have number 48, Nisi, and number 80, Leslie, in a group with their calves. But also, female reproductive stage might determine what males are going to hang out with them too. So we do see association between males and females that is stronger than what we might expect if it was just random. But we would have to look at their reproductive stage to know if maybe it is related to a female being receptive and being at a stage where she can be mated with and have a calf. This is something that we're hoping to look at soon. We're starting to plot out our female's reproductive stage to know when they might be pregnant, when they might have a calf, and then see if those things relate to the associations that they have in those periods of time. And then my favorite explanation for why they have these friendships is because they might just like each other. Their moms might have formed groups when they were babies, and they might have kept up these preferential associations because they were friends when they were little. So this has been suggested for some giraffe groups. They have not been able to confirm any other biological reason like reproductive stage or age or sex as the explanation for preferential associations. So it might be like humans. If two moms are pregnant at the same time, they're going to have their kids at a similar time. They might then go out to the park together when their kids are babies. And as they grow up, those kids might have a strong relationship because their mothers were friends. So this is also a possibility. Might be difficult to prove, but once we've investigated the other explanations, we might get a little bit more insight into this. So those are all of our hypotheses as to why it might be beneficial to form friendships. But I'll leave you with a little bit of a question. Research wouldn't be research if we didn't have more questions to ask. So just looking at associations, is anything missing from the story? Are we missing out on what they're actually doing? Does association actually equal interaction? So I'll borrow an example from Cal's photo ID talk. She talks about an alien that comes down and has to identify different humans. If an alien were to come down and see you at school or at the office 8 hours a day, 5 days a week with the same people, if they were just to assume that because you're there so much time with those individuals that you have a strong relationship, they might not get the right idea. You might have a best friend who lives across the country. You might only be able to see them for holidays, for special occasions. So that association level would be pretty low, but that relationship is actually much higher. So if we're actually able to observe their underwater interactions, what they're doing, maybe we'll get a better idea of what their relationships actually are. So this is a limitation for other dolphin groups, dolphin research groups, but for the Dolphin Communication Project, we are able to watch underwater interactions. And part of the rest of my research is looking at the interactions and seeing how they relate to associations. Can we make the assumption that a high association indicates a strong relationship? Is it corroborated by the interaction that we observe? So with that, I'll leave you with a fun video. These are two juvenile females, number 102, sulfur, and number 110. And you can see their pectoral fin contact is the very social behavior. It strengthens relationships. You can see they're very comfortable with each other. They're playful. This interaction might not be reflected in the number that we see for their association. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you everyone who submitted questions. Actually, before we get to the questions, I'm just gonna put in a little spiel about the upcoming programs. So remember, if you're interested in these webinars, you can find our archived webinars on our website under the Education tab. You can also find them on our new YouTube channel, which is Clever Dolphin Communication Project. And so if you were particularly interested maybe in the photo ID aspect of this work, you can replay past webinars. And then you can learn more about all things dolphin through our podcast, the Dolphin Pod. Dr. Justin Gray is the host of that program, and Justin is actually going to be leading our next dolphin lesson. That's geared more towards younger kids, but Justin's really funny, so I think everyone's going to enjoy it next week. He's going to talk about fantastical facts about dolphins, and we're going to be giving away a copy of his book, 22 Fantastical Facts About Dolphins, so make sure you tune in. And then next Thursday, we will have our next deep dive with our collaborator, Dr. Deirdre Yater, and she's going to talk about dolphin cognition and sort of how we design studies, how we design experiments to ask questions about dolphin cognition. That's next Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern. And we wouldn't be a good nonprofit if we didn't let you know of all the ways that you can support us. So of course, stay in touch. Even if you can't financially support us, send us emails, share our social media posts, tell your friends about us. And if we don't get to your question today, reach out to us. You know, we'll try and answer it later. Those 3 starred ways to financially support us, right now, we're trying to figure out a way that we can give back to either first responders, essential workers who are working so hard and taking on so much risk during this crazy COVID time, or just some folks who are maybe feeling down or having financial troubles and need a pick-me-up. So if you, for every $15 you spend on those three things, our Adopt a Dolphin program, memberships, donations, t-shirts, bandanas, for every $15 that you spend, we will send an electronic adoption kit to someone who could use a little thank you or a pick-me-up. And you can choose those people if you want, or if you're not sure, we can make sure that they get to someone. So thank you for indulging me in all of that. We have quite a few questions that center around calves, Nicole, and the mother-calf relationship. I think that you covered how the female COAs might change whether or not they're pregnant or they have a calf. So I'll go into the next question, is about the mother-calf COA itself. Is that a perfect one? Are they together all the time? And were those excluded from your data because that COA would be high?
That's a very good question. So because spotted dolphins are born without spots, we aren't able to actually confirm if a particular mother's calf is in the group at that time. But we do assume that we are going to see if the calf is reliant on its mother, it's going to be in the group with her. And because of that, I did exclude calves from our analyses. So individuals were included once they were a juvenile or older, because you can assume that a calf's relationships and associations are going to depend on its mother's associations. So if its mom is preferentially associating with someone, it might artificially look like the calf is also associating with that individual, even though it's just following where its mother's going. But on the note about calves and their mothers, we can look at patterns of specific calves and mom pairs we know for sure. And we have seen, interestingly, some moms and their calves as they get older keep spending time together, and others hardly ever are in the same group. So specifically, Paul and his mom, Leslie, spend a lot of time together still, even though he is very full grown now. But that's not true for all of the calves. And unfortunately, we're not able to confirm all mother-calf relationships, like genetically relationships. Otherwise, we would look more into that too.
Yes, we never want a calf to get a marking, to get a scar before it gets its spots, but if it absolutely has to, it does mean that we can tell it apart, and then it's handy for us. Do you see the other dolphin associations affected by the presence of a calf in the group? In particular, do groups get larger, and would a hypothesis be that that's to protect calves?
So it is kind of a trend that when there are calves, the groups tend to be a little bit bigger, but it doesn't seem to be, it doesn't hold fast and true. We'll see fairly small groups of just two moms and their calves, but we'll also see big groups with multiple moms, multiple calves, and a lot of males. So that doesn't seem to be a pattern around Bimini. But it is a good idea, a good hypothesis that bigger groups for calves. That's also a good question for if, when they go in the deep water, do their group sizes change? If there are calves going into the deep water with their moms, are they bigger groups than they would be on the relatively safe shallow bank?
I was just for another project reviewing video of Swoosh with her 2011 older calf, and it was just the two of them. It was a long extended observation and a group size of 2. Nobody else was even around. So, still kind of on the mother trend, can you tell visually if a spotted dolphin is pregnant, or do you see the mother with the calf and then go back to estimate reproductive stages?
We are able to see them once they're pretty far along in their pregnancy. So Kel has a story about a very pregnant, was it Juliet?
I think it was Juliet.
And she could basically see the little guy moving around in there. But we don't there's no obvious way to tell when they're early in their pregnancy. So it is based on when they had a calf, about how old it is when we see them, and then working backwards.
Lots of estimating that goes on
Yes.
with wild dolphin research. This is a big shift now in our questions. And I'll also say if anyone has another question that they want to submit to the chat, I'd say this is your last chance. Do researchers know whether the Bimini and the white sand ridge dolphins have dialects or acoustic communication strategies that might be different?
We don't yet. We have not looked into that yet, but that is a really interesting question. The interesting thing about those white sand ridge spotted dolphins is that they have a very similar social system. Aside from those male affiliations that they observe up north, they do have the same fission fusion dynamics, the same preferential associations between same-sex individuals, and they face fairly similar pressures, you know, tiger sharks, the general environment that they live in. But it would be interesting to know if that distance, that separation, was enough for them to develop different dialects. But that's a potential project for someone.
And the last question is, DCP has been studying these dolphins for a long time. For those of you who aren't sure, our photo ID catalog goes back kind of to 1997, but really to 2001. And we consider this kind of our full research site since 2003. So our question is, we've been observing them long enough. Do we have third generation information? Do we have grandmother, mother, offspring? Yeah.
We do have one known generation, but you'll have to remind me who it is.
We knew White Blotch and her calf Noodle, and then Noodle came by the boat and had a calf of her own a few years before we were expecting that, and it certainly made me feel like the old lady who was like, "You're too young for that." But though that calf seemed very healthy, and we were able to see that new mother-calf relationship, after about 2 years, then we haven't seen them since. And we don't know if that has to do with the influx of the white sand ridge dolphins, if that actually ended up displacing some Bimini dolphins. Perhaps they've moved somewhere else, if this simply wasn't a big enough area to accommodate all of those new dolphins, or if they're explorers, or if something more fatal happened to them. It's one of the many, many things we have to just kind of keep going and not know the answer to. So, is there anything else you wanted to add, Nicole, or are you ready to wrap up?
Well, I was just going to say, on the note of relationships and genetics, we are hoping to eventually get a non-invasive way of collecting DNA so that we can look at more things like, even though we haven't been able to confirm that they're related, do siblings hang out together? Do their fathers spend more time or less time with the individuals? Things like that. But hopefully we'll figure out that methodology sometime soon.
And in that way, there's a lot of job security. So we never run out of questions to ask. There are some early research about collecting data from fecal samples. So that may be the way to go. It may be too limiting, but there's definitely a path there opening. So thank you, everybody, for all of your questions and for joining us. And we hope to see you next Tuesday at our Fantastical Facts Talk. And a big thank you to Nicole. This is one of my favorite topics, so I love listening to it and talking about it and hearing all of your questions. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, everyone.